As always, it's my honour to do the introduction. Tonight, Lee Shaw. Lee joined BAE Systems Wharton as an undergraduate apprentice in September 1981, going straight from school to a placement in flight test, just in time to watch the Jaguar fly-by-wire make its first flight. At this point, he decided he rather liked this job. After 3 years at Harrier College doing aeronautical engineering, Lee returned to Wharton full-time and settled down in the operational analysis department within advanced projects for the next 40 years, finally retiring in April this year. He's worked on a wide range of projects over the years, including the Turkish Khan fighter program, but Typhoon has been central to his career from the start, and he's seen it all the way from initial design through to export. So, ladies and gentlemen, Lee Shaw.
Okay, right. Can everyone hear me at the back okay?
Yeah.
Right. The evolution of the Eurofighter Typhoon operational requirements. So this is a history of Typhoon, but focusing on the underpinning operational requirement rather than all the specific details of the airframe and the systems. That's been kind of done many times before. So the real aim is to highlight all of the drivers that underpin that operational requirement and the many complicated interactions between them, covering sort of military need, the maturity of the technology needed to deliver the capability, and of course politics, which is always a factor in the programme. We're going to cover about a 50-year period from 1971 to the present day, starting from Staff Target 396 in 1971. So, a bit of terminology. The Staff Target is the operational requirement. It's the end user's request for a capability to do something, not necessarily dictating the form, and it's certainly not a detailed specification that you give to industry and say, build that. In that case, I hear we talk about staff requirements. That is that detailed specification that arises once you agree the solution to the staff target. So, I think to particularly notice the staff target, the demand for capability isn't always realistic. So, where do we start? Late 1960s, early 1970s. It's the end of empire. British forces are mostly pulled back from east of Suez. We joined the European Economic Community that later became the European Union. The whole thing is a big shift away from the rest of the world towards NATO and collaboration in Europe. NATO itself is changing. In 1967, we have the flexible response doctrine that shifts deterrence from a nuclear-based deterrence more towards having a conventional deterrence as well. The United States, they're busy in Vietnam, fighting the Vietnam War, gaining a lot of experience, developing a lot of technology. In terms of the RAF, well, I think it's fair to say the combat fast jet fleet had evolved in response to a number of things going right and wrong on various programmes. There wasn't really necessarily a coherent strategic plan about what we had. Each of those topics probably merits a presentation itself, and indeed there's a TSL2 one next year, so I won't dwell too much on those, but start off with TSL2 was cancelled, and its replacement, P1154 Supersonic Harrier, was cancelled as well. The Navy's Supercarrier programme was cancelled, so Arcor was retired without any replacement. Again, the consequence of that, the RF, was we got Phantoms and Buccaneers as a byproduct. Jaguar was supposed to be an advanced trainer aircraft, ended up as a ground attack aircraft. Harrier, again, its own story. Now, the Anglo-French Variable Geometry Programme was supposed to fill the gap that the cancellation TSR2 left. That itself was cancelled, but a lot of the concepts that were developed as part of that programme subsequently led to Tornado. So Tornado, by this time, is now starting development. The Vulcans were replaced as a strategic deterrent. Some of those are now available for Polaris submarines. So having said that, collaboration is essential to be able to afford some of these programmes. It's fair to say it had a mixed track record. So, is there anyone from DASA in the room tonight? Good. That makes it easier. So, the focus on NATO, operational requirements for the Cold War. The one really scenario that matters, NATO Article 5, invasion of Western Europe by the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union. Capability in other scenarios for the RAF, less of an interest, more of a fallout of that primary role. The key tasks were so very much interdict large and growing, as you can see from the graph on the right. Warsaw Pact armoured forces, coming across the border into Western Europe. We had to defend the NATO bases, and particularly for the UK, about stopping Soviet bombers coming from the north, and also other things like maritime patrol aircraft and maritime targeting aircraft as well. We had to protect the US and Canadian reinforcements coming across the Atlantic by sea and also by air, and attack ballistic missile submarines in the North Atlantic and Arctic. Not all of those roles are relevant to the tactical fast jet fleet, but for that fleet, key implications are obviously UK air defence, absolutely essential. The support to the army to help them because they were really outnumbered by the Warsaw Pact forces, and there was a lot of pressure from the army staff on the RAF to prioritise that anti-armour role. So again, the army is so worried they're actually asking the RAF for help, which can be quite unusual sometimes. There was a very big worry within the RAF about the vulnerability of the bases to attack, both from things like nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, ballistic missiles, special forces, all of this. They were very, very interested in the need for short takeoff and vertical landing, or vertical takeoff, short, whatever combination you want to call it, and operations from damaged airfields. So that's where we are. So in the RF, early 1970s, we've mentioned all these aircraft before. So we've got Tornado coming in to do UK air defence. So that was Air Staff Target 395 to replace Jaguar and Phantom for UK air defence. Some of the Phantoms were kept, some of the Lightnings, before they were retired, were kept for air defence in West Germany. The interdicted strike version of Tornado was coming in to do those sort of kind of deeper attacks, particularly against fixed targets in the Warsaw Pact rear. Direct engagement of those armoured formations coming across the border was very much the Harrier and Jaguar's job, but kind of by this time that capability was feeling a bit limited, and certainly the capacity wasn't there. So for example, Harrier didn't have a great payload, so in terms of engaged large numbers of targets, it was a bit limited. So Air Staff Target 396 was raised in 1971 for a battlefield short-range interdiction reconnaissance aircraft for the NATO Central Front. Okay. To attack tanks, you need an anti-armour weapon, and we already referred to the fact that you can't just rely on nuclear weapons now. At this time, the RAF's primary anti-tank weapon was a thing called the Sneb rocket pod. To deliver these Sneb pods, you flew in, popped up, found the target, there it is, shallow dive, shoot at what was in a particularly large range. The problem with that is that was right in the heart of the firing envelope of the newly introduced ZSU-23-4 Shilcote radar on the gun system, so this was looking like a really bad idea. Well, the problem with the Sneb rockets is the area of coverage was limited, so to hit multiple aircraft, to hit multiple targets, you need multiple aircraft, or go back around for a second pass, which is generally a bad idea because by this time the target's a little bit annoyed with you. And also obviously aiming something is more difficult with the targets moving. So Air Staff requirement of 97 was raised for an anti-armour mission to try and do something better than the Sneb pod squads. That ends up with the BL-755 thruster bomb entering service. That was a bit better because now it didn't have to pop up, you could just zoom over the target at low level, high speed, press the button, spread a cloud of submunitions everywhere with a pretty good chance of hitting more than one target and then off. Still not ideal to overfly the target, so ASR 1227 was raised for a BL-755 replacement. Now, there were a number of requirements driving that. They wanted to improve survivability by perhaps getting some standoff range in that rather than to fly over the target. Tanks were getting better, so you needed to improve the warheads, and particularly they wanted a sort of fire and forget capability, so you could keep the workload manageable in single-seat aircraft like Harrier, which I think was quite notorious for being difficult to operate. Now, there was a lot of debate around that staff requirement that never really got resolved as to what that weapon was going to be because it was quite technologically demanding. So in the end, Air Staff Target 396 was written around the BL-755. It's probably just as well, because we'll see, BL755 didn't get replaced for a very long time. Let's have target 396, short range ground attack for direct support of land forces in the battle area by treating and disrupting the armoured formations. So, key points. In the UK, we didn't have that kind of capacity or capability that the US were using in Vietnam to put together huge raid packages with lots of different suppression assets to keep the defences down while strike aircraft did their job. It just wasn't something we could do. So the UK doctrine was very much avoid engagement altogether by flying low and fast, taking advantage of sort of terrain masking to hide from the SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, and also the fact that air-to-air radars at that time weren't very good at spotting low-level targets. Also, night fighting equipment is being adopted by the armies, so all of this had to be done day, night, and whatever the weather. Mission profile looks something like that. So, take off from damaged airfields, short take-off and landing in something like 1,200 feet, which is what, about a quarter to a third of the length of an average runway. Really, they were looking for, if possible, something that could do vertical take-off and landing. So, the range requirement start at 180 miles from the RAF Germany bases up to the front line. You keep it right, penetrate low and fast behind reinforcement path formations, which to get at the follow-on forces, the reinforcements, the supply line, hopefully a little bit less defended. And the key is very much on evading fighters, so don't engage them, just evade them. So there's no requirement for air-to-air missiles at this point. Yes, you can have a radar warning receiving, so you can hear the SAMs, you can hear the fighters and take appropriate avoiding action. Electronic countermeasures, we're seen as only if you really need them. Now comes the really hard part. First pass attack with 6 BL755s. So we need to find the target, aim at it, come in, deliver the weapons, get out, but do it first time. No hanging around where they can see you to try and set the attack up. So you need to be able to see the target at some distance in order to have the time to set the attack up and execute effectively. The gun as a backup, and can we do this in the dark in poor weather? And targets not necessarily planned, or we might have to be cued to them or find them ourselves, and obviously moving targets, because that's what targets tend to do a lot of the time. That gives you heavy demands on the kit you need. Ideally a terrain following radar, so you can go low and fast, in the dark, and when it's raining. Low light TV or forward-looking infrared systems, to let you spot, to see things and track them. And again, in order to do a first pass attack, you need quite a long range out of this, so you've got plenty of time to set everything up. A laser ranger for accurate marking, for actually accurate aiming. Mark target seeker, so someone on the ground can put a laser spot on the target, which the aircraft can pick up, and obviously laser pointers were bigger in those days. Inertial navigation, so you get to the right point at the right time. Hands-on throttle and stick, so that's just a way of organising controls in the cockpit for lower workload. Again, all of these are emerging technologies. So, let's have target 396, went out to industry. These are some of the concepts that came back from where I worked at BAE Systems Wharton. Kingston and Brough, also part of BAE at that time, put in their own projects. Now, most of these concepts were based on variations of existing fast jets, although there were a few new designs of even Saab Viggen. Now, the big problem was that sensor suite we just described in the previous slide. It was going to be big, it was going to be complicated, it was going to be expensive. There's a high risk of that programme going wrong. Bear in mind, it's a few years after TSR2, which, again, similar sort of issues, and everyone was painfully aware of that. Really, to get that kind of sensor capability into an aircraft, you need something the size of a medium bomber, which is exactly what the Americans did with their version of the Canberra, the B-57G, 90 which they were using in Vietnam to shoot up trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Try and get what was £3,000 of sensors into a fighter led to something one of the authors has called nasal congestion. So, you take a nice pointy aircraft that's been carefully, lovingly, aerodynamically designed, you put a whole load of sensors with big apertures, because you need that range, into the nose. You get something like this. Now, it's pretty obvious that these configurations are not conducive to supersonic flight. There's also no room for putting a decent-sized air-to-air radar in. There's also, with many of these concepts, no room for a decent air-to-air missile, or particularly larger missiles. So, the RAF kind of took a look at this and you can see that these concepts all offered a very poor air-to-air capability, and they kind of went, no, it's not quite working for us, so eventually they withdrew their staff target 396. And to be fair, there was a great relief from industry, because partly we considered the requirements too narrow in terms of roles. It was quite a specialised ground attack aircraft, probably going to be expensive, not much export potential for it. And we definitely thought it was too ambitious technologically, again, going back to TSR2 and all the problems that sort of pushed the technological envelope was the cause for that programme. So, okay, and while all this is going on, the threat's just getting bigger and bigger. More aircraft, a new generation of Warsaw-Pact strike aircraft, so these have now got improved performance, greater range, they're starting to use precision-guided munitions, allowing them to deliver a greater payload to a longer distance. So again, putting all our air bases at more risk. New air-to-air threats. So particularly the MiG-23 Flogger B, one of the things that has is a look-down capability. So it can now see target flying at low level, which previously certainly Eastern aircraft haven't been able to do. And also a lot of these strike aircraft have some air-to-air capabilities themselves, perhaps kind of self-defense missiles or having radars. So it's all getting more difficult. So, jumping back to FOMG. So in 1976, we now have a situation where the ground attack aircraft, firstly, they can't just hope to avoid encounters with the Warsaw-Pact fighters, because they can now be seen even flying at low level. Phantom and Lightning are now starting to look a bit longer in the tooth, arguably matched or outclassed by the threat. So you can't even rely on them, say, as escorts or sweeps to clear away the enemy fighters, strike aircraft, even if we had the capacity to do it, which we probably didn't. And also that increasing Warsaw-Pact air-to-ground threat means we now need more aircraft to counter that. So we don't just need now ground attack aircraft, we want to try and enhance our air-to-air capability as well. So, Air Staff Target 403 was issued in 1976. An offensive aircraft to replace Harrier and Jaguar. Now, that shifted the balance slightly. That was now prioritising more air-to-air with an air-to-ground role as more secondary. Part of this, one of the influence on this was the emergence of the General Dynamics F-16 in America. That was, the RF were watching that, and it was starting to look like actually you could get quite a decent air-to-ground performance, even out of a fighter that's optimised for air-to-air. And obviously, there's that old maxim that you can turn a fighter into a bomber, but it's difficult to turn a bomb into a fighter, which is obviously one of the things that the Tornado programme was starting to find. So, Air Staff Target 403. Now, in that paragraph, the key word is flexibility. Fully effective air combat performance. So we now want to be able to intercept Warsaw-Pact aircraft, not just defend ourselves against them. We need a meaningful ground attack capability to replace Jaguar and Harrier, but it's not quite as demanding as 396 was. Probably based around a multi-mode radar that can do air-to-air to surface rolls. And we want to do Mach 1.6, which again, the nasal congestion problem would have been an obstacle to. The mission profile is kind of basically the same, but the takeoff requirements now being relaxed a bit. One of the reasons for that was kind of studies were showing that there are actually quite a lot of roads in Western Germany that you could use as sort of makeshift airstrips. The picture is a Jaguar taking off from the M55 motorway near Blackpool back in 1975. But particularly if you have a higher performance aircraft like the F-16, you could really made a lot of strips, short road strips usable. One of my former colleagues spent a happy summer flying around West Germany in a helicopter with one of our pilots, just looking at roads to see which ones they thought they could get an aircraft out of. Particularly again because we've already mentioned that the increasing Warsaw-Pact ground attack capability, the ability to go deeper with more, was increasingly placing all of our aircraft at risk on the other front. Again, continuing to want vertical takeoff, short takeoff, whatever. So, again, 6BL755 and the gun say, you still don't need quite sophisticated navigating attack systems, but now the requirement says you must have 4 air-to-air missiles. At this stage, the latest generation of short-range air-to-air missiles was still credible against that early 1970s threat for reasons we'll come to in a little while. So, for industry, AST403 concepts. Originally came with 28, which were shortlisted to eventually to 6. They were mostly clean sheet designs, unlike AST396. Again, wanted stowable. There was a whole range of features built into these aircraft, of varying degrees of cost, complexity, technological difficulty, risk, collateral damage. So, for example, after burning the exhaust, the vertical takeoff exhaust in Harrier, would have been a big ground erosion problem. So, all of these carry some degree of difficulty. Again, RAF looked at it. There was some enthusiasm for the P96 concept in the top left, and some of the supersonic stowable ones. But in the industry, we thought, well, we still thought supersonic stowable was premature. It's difficult, and we particularly P96. We felt it was a very conservative design. It was too similar to our contemporaries, but with the additional problem that we were limited by reusing the Tornado engine and radar to save money. So we definitely felt this was all a bit end of the line, too conservative. Plus also, because some of these concepts, we were effectively reinventing the F-16 and the F-18, which were already in development and to some extent entering production in America. There was a feeling that by the time we get to market with something, the Americans would have captured it. So, again, we weren't keen on it. Again, not all of the configurations had much growth capacity for improved air-to-air missiles. Now, time passes again, and that'll be a theme of the evening. So, AST403, defensive aircraft replaced Harrier and Jaguar. There was now a pressing need to replace the first generation of Harriers, so the stowable part of AST403 was pulled out into air staff target 409 for basically an improved Harrier, which became the Harrier 2. The advanced stowable part was taken out to air staff target 410. So it's for a longer time scale. So this was the wish for a multi-role Mach 2 stowable aircraft. And that was intended to supersede both AST403 and 409 sometime in the future, recognising it would probably need a US partner to help pay for it. And AST410 was also morphed into Naval Staff Target 6464 for a Sea Harrier replacement. In the event, 25 years later, that became the F-35B Lightning II, which gives you an indication of just how challenging that supersonic stowable was. It was very definitely a good thing that we'd taken that out to move forward. Everything else moving forward at the same time. So in 1976, we see the SU-27 Flanker and the MiG-29 Fulcrum for the first time. It was starting to, people in the West were starting to realise that the MiG-23 was actually quite good. It had this look-down capability, and it was probably going to be potentially better than the F4 Phantom. And the thing with Fogger, it just carried on getting better. It was continuously improved as time went along. Across the Atlantic in America, the Americans are working on all their programs. Now, whilst for various reasons these weren't quite what the RAF wanted, but there's always that thing in the UK and the RAF that we're always kind of looking across the Atlantic and go, well, not quite what we wanted, but it's good enough, let's go and buy some of that. So again, particularly with industry, we're feeling competition. Now, our understanding of what it takes to defeat the future threat is also evolving. There's some various trials, and we'll talk about the threat and these trials in a little while. So our understanding of what this next aircraft needs to be is developing as well. So, recognising the fact particularly that the threat was getting better, there was an increasing need to replace sort of Phantom. AST403 now became an agile fighter bomber with more emphasis on air-to-air combat. So agile here is probably the key word. It has to be very manoeuvrable, it has to be able to hold its own in close-in dogfighting, not just poking off a missile and hoping it will scare the threat away. It has to be able to get in and mingle and win. That means you need a lot of agility in the airframe and you need a good air-to-air weapon. So, ASD 403 Revision 1 is now an offensive aircraft to replace Jaguar. The Harrier part's been taken out. As time moved on, the flank and the fulcrum started into service with a new generation of air-to-air missiles. There were hints also that beyond that, there was even another new generation of missiles arising. The Russians were also starting to use things like airborne early warning aircraft, which until then had been a force multiplier that only existed in the West. So things like the E-3 AWACS. So as time moves on, it becomes that Phantom is even more limited, and even ADV is going to start having problems if it comes with these things. So we now need a Jaguar and an ADV replacement, which ultimately ends up as Air Staff Target 414. Right, so we'll talk about the threats and the analytical studies a little bit more. Just a very good look at Air Staff Target 410. Day and night ground attack with a secondary air-to-air capability. Now, this was designed around the Air Staff Target 1238 guided missile for anti-armour operations. That was another saga where, again, couldn't quite work out what we wanted, and we'll see that took a long time to arrive. So again, it's a paper weapon. So did you really want to design an aircraft around it in this time frame? Probably not. The first mentions of reduced signature, which is what later became stealth. Supersonic VSTOL isn't getting any easier. So the war contribution to this was P103. This achieved Stovall via squiddling engine pod. So really great performance, but the takeoff case with an engine failure was never going to end well. So again, it was great, so the technical solution, but in practice it was difficult to sell. One reason for looking at this is this is one of the first Canard 4-plane configurations, certainly at Warton. Now, Canard 4-planes are a very good way of getting high agility at high incidence. Agility, turn rate is straightforward, I need to go that way fast. But what if you suddenly need to change direction? Changing direction isn't, once you're committed to turn that way, changing direction isn't easy, particularly if you've got the nose up to get the... So, changing direction at times is not easy, but canards can help with that. You can see here an emerging solution to that nasal congestion problem. Well, if we can't put the sensors inside the aircraft, let's put them outside in the pod, where we can take them on and put them off just as and when we need them. Some of the configurations also have the ability to carry larger air-to-air missiles. So, again, you're starting to see some thinking outside the box to break that mould, that conservative mould that was one problem with P96. But as I say, very difficult. It took 25 years to get a solution to this. Right, the threat, particularly the Su-27 flanker. One of the real problems was it had very long range. So the idea that Tornado ADV was going to sit over the North Sea shooting down bombers, blast, we might actually find there's flankers coming as escorts now. So it had long range, Tornado ADV might counter it. Very good kinetic performance, sort of F-15 class. Modern radar, infrared search and track, and the new generation missiles. The A-10 Alamo came in a whole range of different flavours, and particularly the A-11 Archie. It was an agile missile, but one of the things the flanker had was a helmet-mounted sight. So you have to actually look at the target and shoot. So if there's a target, previously if there's a target over there, I have to manoeuvre the aircraft to aim at it, acquire the target and shoot. With a helmet-mounted sight, if the target's over there, I'm not a pilot, but I can do it that fast in the simulator. A real game changer for close combat. And flanker had it and Tornado didn't. So just a few charts just to compare things. So fuel fraction, what percentage of the aircraft takeoff mass is fuel? Flanker's got bags on it. Wing loading, so that's how much wing have I got to carry the weight of my aircraft. Tornado's not got a particularly big wing area. Flanker, you see, big wing. Thrust to weight ratio, obviously more thrust equals faster. Again, Tornado struggling a bit, particularly at high altitudes. RB199, the Tornado engine was optimised for low-level strike. It's well known it struggles a bit at high altitudes. In terms of missiles, well, the weight of the missile generally means it's got a bigger rocket motor. Bigger rocket motors mean faster and longer range. So you can see that Tornado is definitely feeling a bit out of that. You can also see, I've put Typhoon numbers on. You can see where you were needing to go in performance in order to have something that could beat a flanker. So, going back to this, so this is the first picture of flank array from 1976, this is P96. They're very similar configurations, except that of course P96 is hampered by having the Tornado engine and the Tornado radar. So what you've now got is a similar airframe technology, but with it's probably a less capable engine and a less capable radar. So there's no way that P96 was ever going to be able to really robustly beat the flanker. Wasn't the way forward. So, analysis of air combat. So this is my own sort of specialism. Particularly influential with these trials in the US in the sort of 1974-78 period. These were sort of live, taking real fighters, flying mock combats. So one of the problems with the larger, the medium range air-to-air missiles of the time is that they use semi-active guidance. The way that worked is the radar illuminated the target with the radar beam. The missile had a passive seeker that looked for that reflection and honed on it. The problem was, if the radar stopped, the missile's no longer got anything to home in onto. The missile misses. And the reason this was a problem with this new generation of short-range missiles that were coming in, previously short-range air-to-air missiles, heat seekers, you had to be behind the target, so the heat seeker could see the hot engine parts and home in on it. The next generation had more sensitive seekers that could actually home in on things like skin friction of the aircraft. They could shoot the target head on. And what that meant here was that your superfighter would fire its medium range air-to-air missile, and off it goes. But while that missile was in flight, your opponent could dash in, get to a range close enough to shoot the heat-seeking missile off. In fact, it got hit very shortly afterwards, but now there's a live missile. It's heat-seeking, it's not reliant on anything from its launcher, and off it goes, and you'd end up with often a mutual kill. So your very expensive American superfighter, particularly F-15s, have just been shot down by cheapest chips, MiG-21. This was not really where the Americans wanted to be. Two things arose from that. One, in the early 1970s, actually, the moral was, if you had one of these new generation of short-range air-to-air missiles, it was still a credible deterrence against some of those early 70s threats. The US, of course, that wasn't good enough, and they promptly started work on compact, so it would fit on any fighter, not just some hulking brute like the F-14 Tomcat, which is a different type of missile. Medium-range missile, but one with some kind of autonomous guidance capability. And this ultimately led to the A-120 AMRAAM missile, which, again, we'll come to a bit more later. Right. Right, so the BAE, we were busy as well. We were looking more at the close combat side of things. So we built a twin dome simulator, so we had two simulators side by side, put the pilots in them, let them fight each other. A number of studies were done, both by ourselves and jointly with MOD, and we came to the conclusion that two things. One is that you need both agility in the aircraft and agility in the missile. It was a case of either or, you needed both. In the UK, that ultimately led to the ASRAAM missile. Now, our colleagues over in Germany, what's now Airbus Germany, and back then was Mission at Volkel-Boehm, with a bit of help from a couple of guys from my department, they were developing a constructive computer simulation to investigate beyond visual range combat. So, those sort of medium ranges where you can't physically see the target. Constructive simulation is one where it's all in the computer. You program the computer, you program sort of what we now call artificial intelligence targets, press the button, the computer will go off, fly 100 combats, summarise the results and give you the answer. There's a joint study done, that's the cover of it, and that sort of what we call a word plot is a kind of visualisation of the results of the model. Now, a number of studies were done, the conclusion of which you really need supersonic acceleration and maneuverability. Supersonic acceleration, so when you fire your missile, you can fling it as hard and fast as you possibly can to get the maximum range out of it. Good radar capability, because we're beyond visual range, so if you can't see it, you can't shoot it. Reduced radar cross-section, not necessarily going full-on stealth, which is not really there at this time, but just reduce the radar cross-section to stop them shooting back. Key, a beyond visual range missile with an active radar seeker, so that the missile, when it gets to the target, can lock on by itself without any support from the launch aircraft. Having said that, the radar can get to an air-to-air missile that size, doesn't have a big range, it's only going to see the target as it gets close to it, and you need something that can tell the missile where to go between launch and getting that close to the target, which is usually a data link of some kind from the launch to the missile. Typically it's built into the radar, so the radar needs to be able to be compatible with the MRAM missile. Right, so where are we now? So, 1976, list of Type 403, revision 1, various studies going on. So, we kind of start to have a feel for what we want, but the problem is, the UK production run is only going to be small. We're busy paying for tornado development at this time. So AST403 wasn't really affordable for the UK, but fortunately Europe had the same sort of problems. The Phantoms, the Starfighters, the French Jaguars were all sort of, again, becoming long in the tooth in capability terms. So there was the possibility of European collaboration to deliver the programme. There were a number of attempts at getting a multilateral programme off the ground. At the same time, at BA, we were looking at lightweight fighters, definitely trying to get into the export market. And this P106 concept was also probably our best design to do that. The problem with all these multilateral attempts is that they all failed for one reason or another. Partly it was due to just, at this time, it was still very difficult to get all of these requirements for air-to-air and air-to-service into a compact and affordable airframe at reasonable technical risk. Plus also trying to get anything going off the French, always problematic. They wanted particularly something to put on their aircraft carriers. They were always very conscious of having something smaller for the export market. They've had a lot of success with Mirage, which is quite a very low cost. And they always wanted design leadership. None of these multilaterals got off the ground. Good news is that while all this was going on, the UK technology base is starting to develop. So in 1975, Ferranti started work on what's called a medium pulse repetition frequency radar mode. Now, the particular advantage of that, an environment such as is going to be the case on Central Europe during World War III. Ultimately, that work got in place on the Gripen programme to develop the radar for that. Another thing Ferranti were quite keen on was to make the radar compatible with a single-seat aircraft. Obviously, in Tornado, the Fox Hunter, we have a dedicated weapon system operator to operate the radar. You haven't got that luxury in the single-seat aircraft. And if you're a twin-seat aircraft, you've got all the penalties that come with that in terms of mass, training the pilots, and so on. The P106 program, one of the kind of useful byproducts of that, although it was there in the paper aeroplane, was when the Royals finally realised that the RB199 wasn't the engine, for a future fighter, and they started to look a bit more seriously at new engines. At Wharton, we were starting to look at advanced structures, particularly carbon fibre. Started the Jaguar looking at fly-by-wire, resulting in the Jaguar fly-by-wire programme, the demonstrator plane in 1981, which is, was it 100 yards that way. Other technologies becoming available. So, mentioned the pave spike electric targeting pod on P103. That's now coming to RAF service on the Buccaneers. Now, whilst pave spike was a day-only pod, obviously things were moving on, and a little bit later on, the Americans are now working on pods with the nighttime capability as well, so putting an infrared channel in with the TV. The absolutely critical point is 1980. There's an agreement between the US and Europe that the US will go away and develop the AMRAAM missile, and we'll buy it. UK and Germany will develop the AMRAAM missile, and the Americans will buy it, which they never did, but the key point is AMRAAM is now a reality. The Americans are going to develop it, and we can now take the risk of developing an aircraft specifically with AMRAAM as its primary weapon. So what we're now starting to see is that the technology is emerging, and we're now getting to the point where we can now put all of these multiple different roles into a sort of smaller, compact airframe. So lightweight gun visual range missiles. These are a couple of 100 kilos, not half-ton Phoenix behemoth that the F-14 would carry, which won't fit onto anything else. Position air-to-surface weapons and the targeting pods. So again, got around nasal congestion. We don't need quite the same huge payloads to achieve the same effect. Technology base is developing both in the UK and also in Europe. And not forgetting things like the role of computer-aided design as a means of working out how to integrate all these things together. So there's a lot of things starting to happen here. Nonetheless, time is moving on, and in 1980, in UK industry, we kind of think we've got to get a grip on this. We've got to make something happen, otherwise the Americans would take up the entire market. Industry put some serious amount of its own money into it, resulting in a concept called P110. There was a bit of an opportunity to sell that to the RAF and the Saudis, and whilst neither of those were willing to fund a development programme at this time, the lobbying around that did at least have a very positive outcome to persuaded the RAF actually something like P110 was actually what they needed. That in turn unlocks government funding and other opportunities. So there's another iteration of multilateralism with Germany and Italy, resulting in something called the Advanced Combat Aircraft. But key to that was the fact that unleashed government funding for demonstrator programmes. The experimental aircraft programme that flew in 1985, somewhere there, isn't it? Yeah. That pulled together the carbon fibre and the fly-by-wire and the canard configuration into one nice package. The XG40 engine programme at Rolls-Royce, again moving beyond RB19. In case of Ferranti, their experience now got them the ability to develop the radar for the Sea Harrier, which is coming along, and that was very much built around AMRAAM. Blue Vixen and Ram Sea Harrier was actually a very good combination. So, I'm not going to talk too much about airframe concept, and the main reason looking at this is the importance of the Delta canard configuration in achieving that high agility. So, but then that was not something that was present in those early concept studies, but now this is mature. Particularly, makes a good combination of fly-by-wire. All of these configurations are often unstable, and you need the fly-by-wire to keep everything working properly. So, canards, the way to go at this period of time. Now, all of these, which are the solution, the potential solutions to the problem, the operational requirement, are all twin-engine aircraft. Single-engine concept just weren't really going to work it. Going back to SL43, there was a comment from the RAF guys saying a single-engine concept gives you half the effectiveness at 2/3 of the price. Very much I think what we were finding with our study. We'll come back to that comment later. So we kind of know what we want now. We know what the form of the solution looks like. We just got to work out the programme, how to deliver it, and just get to that point of final design. So in 1983, 5 nations got together. So this time we've got the French in the loop to agree an outline staff target, and again we'll sort of refine that just to drive concepting studies where we can all sit around the table, compare designs, and work out where we wanted to go. Now, say agree an outline staff target. That's a bit generous. There was still a lot of disagreement about exactly what performance was needed, and rather than being point specifications for, say, I need this turn rate at this speed and altitude, everything was expressed as bands. There was still a lot of wriggle room in that specification to cover that differences that just hadn't been reconciled. Particularly France wanted, again, they were more interested in placing the Jaguars in the air to surface rather than high-end, beyond visual range combat. They also wanted a design that was closely matched to French industrial capability, so they could grab as much work as possible. The way the French approached this was their negotiating tip was fairly simple. They proposed unrealistically low values for key parameters. Whenever everybody else inevitably compromised, that's the end of what they wanted. The mass of the aircraft was the biggest example of this. So the RAF were kind of thinking, well, we'd like something pushing 11 tonnes to fit everything in, to deliver the capability that we think is necessary. The French said, no, we want 8.5 tonnes. The compromise value was 9.5 tonnes, which turned out to be exactly what the French wanted in the first place. Didn't work quite so well on some of the other parameters, so everything was still deadlocked, and there was a final showdown. The French refused to move. Now, the UK Minister of Defence at the time was Michael Heseltine. He was very Eurofighter. He was very keen to get compromise, and he started to go, at which point his RAF supporting team tapped him on the shoulder and said, no, you've been told by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher you're not to compromise any further. You don't argue with Maggie. So, deadlock. To try and settle the arguments, we came up to Warton and we put both the French concept and the formation concept into a twin-dome simulator. Did some trials fighting against the future threats. The French boycotted it, probably because they knew what the answer was going to be. But the four-nation concept was what we actually needed. Once we got the conclusions of this, and there was other MOD work going on, obviously alongside this, it wasn't just ourselves at Warton. The position hardened, the French went off to do their own thing with Rafale, and that was that. Now, the UK analysis was summarised in something called the S-curve. This is the S-curve. It's very famous in analysis circles because this curve was shown to Maggie Thatcher to explain what the red lines were, why they were needed, why we needed Typhoon in the first place. And she looked at it and said, right, I get it, I completely understand this problem. Thank you for explaining this to me very clearly. I wish everybody else who talked to me was this clear. So it became quite famous. So to explain the S-curve, so this axis, what you do is you take some key parameters of the airframe, like supersonic acceleration, radar cross-section, radar range, and you shoot little formulas to combine them to a single number. You compare that number to the assailant, and it tells you, in theory, how much better is my system than their system. Obviously, the more you put in, the more expensive it gets. So this is also like a cost axis as well. This axis, fairly obvious, do we win in air-to-air combat, BVR combat, or we'd like to say, or do we always lose? But when you do a lot of simulations, you get a curve, that should be. When you put the concepts into it, what you find is Rafale is somewhere in the middle. It's about the same performance-wise overall as the threat. So it has like a 1-to-1 exchange ratio. Every one you shoot down, you'll lose a Rafale. Typhoon's further up the curve, up here. The American F-22 is right at the top. So, okay, so Typhoon's better than Rafale, but it's a bit more expensive. You could make the argument, well, Rafale's cheaper, we'll buy more of them, then we can afford more of them than we can Typhoons, so we'll have more numbers, and it'll all, overall, it'll sort itself out. Yeah, reasonable argument. The problem comes when the threat gets better. We've already seen how the threat's been evolving with time. So if the threat gets better by a certain amount, everything moves this way on the axis. Now the problem is that where Rafale is, it slides down quite a lot. Typhoon slides down a bit, F-22 doesn't budge, and that's why the Americans spent a fortune on it. The problem is now that Rafale is losing quite badly, very badly. Typhoon, not quite as effective as it was, but it's still winning. And whilst, you can always, as the threat grows, you can get some of this back, for example, with a new missile like Meteor. You're going to struggle to get all of that back. So, Rafale, or at least what the French were proposing as a concept, was never going to be robust going forward. And that's why we ended up buying Typhoons. So, right, so the French have gone off. Everyone's in agreement we're going to have a programme. So, we start the process of writing our operational requirement in terms of the European staff requirement, and then refining it. Now, one of the problems was that the parameters that staff requirement was written around were still the original 5-nation compromise figures. It was a political need just to keep the door open in case the French wanted to come back. It was never going to happen, but because of politics. The problem with that is that meant that the UK got an aircraft that was perhaps 10% smaller than it really wanted. Less range, and that would have been, that accident would have been quite useful over the North Sea for long-range intercepts. And the problematic mass target, we knew to get everything we wanted into the airframe we needed probably airframe heavier. And trying to meet that mass target was, so one of the reasons for cost growth on Eurofighter. I think we had to develop special lightweight rivets or something, rather than using standard rivets. All that sort of thing, it just made life difficult. Anyway, finally, development goes ahead, just in time for the end of the Cold War. So now the Warsaw Pact threat has gone away. Our defeat the Warsaw Pact requirement is now replaced by something might happen somewhere, we don't quite know what, we better be flexible. So this was now a bit of a hard sell, particularly in Germany. What do we need a brand new expensive fighter for? We need something for air policing, fine, but we don't need something really high-end like Typhoon. So it was a huge challenge to the cost need for Typhoon. And when the new German defence minister came in post, he said, right, he really wanted to cancel the whole thing as a walk away completely. But what his bright idea was, we'll stop doing Eurofighter, we'll use the technology we've developed and put it in something smaller and lighter. That'll be really fine, that'll be fine, that'll be good enough. So, we all went off, started looking back around the loop, looking at single engine designs and all the rest of it. But as you've obviously seen from, what we mentioned, from the S-code, you can see that if you've got something that's less capable than Typhoon, against, when the 3 threats do turn up, you're not going to have robust capability. I mean, obviously, we knew that was the answer, but we had to go through the motions, report back to Mr. Rowe saying, respectfully, sir, your idea is bonkers. But having gone through the motions, okay, and back off. And off we go again. There was another argument around the radar. So the Germans had just upgraded all of their Phantoms with a variant of the American APG-65 radar that the F-18 used. So we're really keen to use it on Typhoon, again, to save money, obviously help with commonality and things. Again, because there was a clear operational requirement, a clear description of the threat environment, we could do analyses to show that actually that radar wasn't going to be able to track things in that modern environment. And you needed a new, improved radar technology, which was the ECR-90 radar, which came from a multilateral radar using European technology. So again, there was another argument, but because we had that clear operational requirement and could construct evidence to say this radar technology is what you need, we won that argument and we moved on. Eventually, first flight and production deliveries. Hurrah! Time moves on. So during the early years of Typhoon, particularly with the Germans not being interested in any other than air-to-air development was prioritised. And obviously that was the kind of, for 403 and 404, that was a primarily aircraft, so that got the attention. Particularly Germany, dropping bombs on people was, strengthening verboten. We don't do that anymore. The UK still needs an air-to-surface replacement for Jaguar, but we had some of those on Harrier. And the feeling then was, well, it's all now about the future world. The Warsaw Pact's gone. It'll be wars of choice. And wherever we go, the Americans will be there. They'll clear the skies of enemy fighters. We don't have that problem having to fight our way through fighting defences to get to the target. Americans will do it. We can trust the Americans, can't we? Which meant that there was very slow progress on the surface side of Eurofighter. And then one of the criticisms of Eurofighter has always been, it was never designed to do it to surface. It jolly well was. It just didn't get that love and attention in the early years. But the world's moving on, operational experience and technology are developing. So the European staff requirement, the weapon load that Typhoon was designed around, certainly for the UK was laser guided bombs used against fixed targets. Great, they're now mature. We'll have some known, thank you very much now. Targeting pod to aim them. BL-75 cluster bombs, we've talked about those, 6 of those. £1,000 unguided bombs, probably because we've got lots of them lying around and we need to use them all. Air-launched anti-radiation missile. Now that was a lightweight missile that could be carried on fighters, and the idea was you went at low level, fired it, it went off, it zoomed up, got to the top, popped a little parachute, which hung there over the enemy defences. When it saw a threat radar, a sound radar light up, popped the parachute, down it goes. Good at keeping the enemy air defences down, I'll do zipping, high speed, low level, and do the job. So, however, we get to 1991, Gulf War 1, and it was realised it operated at very low level, very high speed, with unguided munitions, you were going to get high losses. And because we no longer facing existential threats, all of these conflicts became politically sensitive. You didn't really want to be taking the sort of losses you would accept in, you know, it was the Warsaw Pact or the Battle of Britain, something like that. Now, the answer is, you know, to move up to higher altitudes with precision guided munitions. That's kind of what they shifted to that profile during the Gulf War One. Time moved on, Gulf War Two. So again, you know, was a choice. We don't want losses, so we're much more interested in doing standoff attacks rather than overflying the target with anything really. So things like the Storm Shadow cruise missile, particularly useful for this. Later on, as we get to things like Afghanistan, precision attack, counterinsurgency, so you want a very precise attack with a low collateral damage weapon. £1,000 weapons are not low collateral damage. Cluster bombs are not low collateral damage. None of these are suitable for counterinsurgency. 2005, and then particularly when we get to 2007, where there's an international treaty and cluster munitions are banned, BL-75 has to be withdrawn. It's actually legal now. And Jaguar was retired. So, what does that leave? So, the upshot of all of that, and again, the weapons story. So, Paveway 2 became, it did what it had to do, that was fine, replaced by something better downstream. Alarm had its own development problems. It went on to Tornado. Tornado was doing all the heavy lifting on the to ground at this time. And by the time the air-to-air side is sorted out and starts looking more enthusiastic about the air-to-surface weaponry, the end of Alarm's life is kind of coming up, so what's the point in just integrating on Typhoon just for a few years? So, anti-armour munition. So, Air Staff Target 1227 we mentioned right at the start, went nowhere. 1238, which is for more standoff, that was cancelled at the end of the Cold War because there's no tanks to choose out anymore. Until they got into Iraq, realised other people have tanks as well. The programme was probably resurrected, but again, for reasons, it didn't even go on to Tornado until 2006, and then it got a laser seeker to add to its existing radar seeker, which made it actually very good for this low collateral precision attack in counterinsurgency. So the upshot of all of that was of these original weapons, in the end, only the Paveway 2 bomb was ever integrated, along with a different slightly better targeting pod. So, okay, that's fine. Tornado and Harrier are doing everything. Except that in 2010, 2010 Security, Defence and Security Review, Tornado and Harrier retired early. Whilst F-35B was now on order, that was running late, and by the time that arrived, that was needed for the carriers rather than anything else. So we're now a huge gap moving. This was a thing called Project Centurion, which was a programme to replace, to put all the Tornado functionality that was necessary onto Typhoon, to allow Typhoon to replace the Tornado in the surface role, particularly on deep attack, close air support. Time moves on, and the threat gets worse, particularly with the surface-to-air missiles. I mean, the Russians are bringing out a new variant or new generation of surface-to-air missiles every few years at this point. So what we now also need is alarms going out of service. So SAMs are getting better. We need more ability to actually suppress those NBO defences, referred to as CL. Okay, we've got two new problems. The operational requirement has evolved once more since we started the project. So, Project Centurion, Typhoon weapons evolution. This is the stores diagram for Typhoon as it was originally envisaged. And you can see, particularly we can carry 6 air-to-air missiles and 7 air-to-surface munitions. And that, that's a good mix of air-to-air and air-to-surface missions, air-to-surface weapons. That's the thing that allows us to fight our way in through fighter defences and still do a useful air-to-surface role. So Project Centurion is about putting the UK's current weapon portfolio onto Typhoon. So, okay, fine. Paveway 2 go away to Paveway 4, a new and improved laser guided bomb. The BL-75 capability replaced by Brimstone, which is a dedicated anti-armour weapon, plus its new laser seeker for other applications as well. That's great. We don't like flying over targets to drop bombs anymore, so Storm Shadow was moved from Tornado to Typhoon. So that's a long-range cruise missile, 150 miles plus range. Latest generation targeting called Lightning 5. Now, also putting the medium missile on to replace AMRAAM. Similar concept, just better. The gap there is Erlop's anti-radiation missile. Now, that's because in UK doctrine, getting into complex air defences, engaging targets, standoff distances, that's in the UK is the job of F-35 because it's got the stealth capability to get in there relatively unnoticed and do the job. So there's no direct placement on Typhoon or on UK Typhoons for long. So now you can see, now we've got 6 air missiles making up to 10 better surface conditions. So we've retained that multi-role capability and made it better. That's in fact, the Storm Shadows combined with everything else is a bit of a fantasy configuration, but normally you'd have 2 fuel tanks on there. But even so, Brimstone, pave formats, very flexible, very capable. So, although F-35 is there to deal with to handle operations in high threat environments, as the missile ranges of the threat surface-to-air missiles get longer and longer, you can't avoid the fact that you've got to place Typhoons at risk at some point. So even within Typhoon, there's requirements evolving to manage particularly those surface-to-air threats and engage targets from longer range. In the UK, that's bringing new radar on the ECRS2, and that can do electronic warfare to sort of manage those radio frequency threats, the surface-to-air missile radars, and it can also do long-range radar mapping, so you can pick up targets, particularly to identify them at longer ranges. We can kind of at least stay out of the threat zones. We'd like to put Spear 3 on the aircraft, particularly as all the Spear 3 test flights are being done from a Typhoon, but the money's not there. Personal obvious anyway. In Germany, they're drawing the same conclusions about needing to manage threats, take a different approach by putting big jammer pods under wing and adopting a different anti-radiation missile, the American sort of Argon. So, coming back, let's kind of recap at this point. So, Air Staff Target 396 evolved to 403 Vision 1 into Air Staff Target 414, picking up Tornado ADV, which was built for Air Staff Target 393, leading to Typhoon. The Stovall part of AST 403 goes up into Air Staff Targets 409 and 410, ultimately leading to F-35B Lightning II replacing both the Harriers, Sea Harriers, and meeting that desire for supersonic Stovall. Tornado IS was supposed to be replaced by Air Staff Target 425, a particular program called Future Offensive Air System. That never came to anything. Well, that money postcode war. So when Tornado was retired by Project Centurion, we put Tornado functionality onto Typhoon, leaving the 2 type of fleet, Lightning II and Typhoon. Very different aircraft, both extremely capable in their own way, but I'm providing that some complementary capability. And that's where the RAF is today. Typhoon is still in production. It's going to be around at least into the 2050s. The operating requirement definitely continues to evolve. In fact, since I wrote those words, events in the Gulf, masses of drones coming out of Iran, and an emerging requirement for low-cost anti-drone weapon, which after a 2-month crash program resulted in the APK, we got laser-guided rocket pods being put onto Typhoon, and they're now flying around in the Gulf. Things move on. However, I'm pretty confident that one requirement will stay the same. 2 left birds, as we were talking about. I have every confidence that we will, in a few years' time, there'll be a picture of a tempest escorting a bird. So thank you for listening. I know it's been quite a lot, but I think the key theme of this presentation is very much the huge number of moving parts that had to come together to deliver Typhoon into service. So thank you for listening. I'm open to questions.
What's a radiation missile?
Anti-radiation missile. So that has a radio seeker in the nose. So it's just a radar receiver. So it listens out for radar signals. When it sees one, it directs the missile onto it. So most of the missiles being radar guided,
Right.
also the big missiles are radar guided. So yeah, so it encourages people not to switch their radars on. Sorry.
So you decided on the canard configuration for agility, but the F-22's got thrust vectoring.
Yeah.
Why did you decide not to go that way?
Some of it's a bit, I mean, lucky they're very, very snotty about canard configurations, very not on my aircraft thing, but yeah, but again, thrust vectoring is great, but again, it's risk, technology risk and all the rest of it, and again, I mean, that's one of the reasons F-22 costs whatever 3-4 times as much as Typhoon. Yeah, it would be nice, it would be great to have, but it's, and again, it's probably, right, going on too many tangents here, but again, yeah, the Russians are very fond of thrust vectoring. It can give you an advantage used correctly in close combat. It's not a panacea. One of the problems is that thrust vectoring will let you manoeuvre at very high incidence. The problem is you put the aircraft like that, it's like a brick wall. It slows down very fast, runs out of lift, starts going down, and you're kind of helpless for a bit. And if you know it's coming, there are tactics to counter that. So yeah, it's great, but it's a different way of approaching things. Okay, there was a question at the back there just a moment ago.
Are you able to comment on how the air staff target requirements for Tempest differ to Eurofighter?
I think short answers, other than it's intended to replace Eurofighter, no. Yeah, it's a live programme, so...
But he looks at it's a very different airplane.
Yeah, it's because the world's evolved. I mean, certainly stealth, the paradigm of air combat has changed somewhat. Yeah, supersonic performance is still useful, but stealth, obviously, very, very high stealth, obviously can give you a big advantage as well. So I said, Typhoon and F-35 complementary, but again, obviously, but Tempest is what it is because, again, the operation requirement has moved on, scenarios are different, technology is different. That one here.
Yeah, I mean, you've illustrated some of the politics of there, really,
Yeah.
that slowed things down with it. But you've ended up with a very, very efficient aircraft platform, fly-by-wire, which means you can operate canards with that instability inherent within the aircraft that the computers control. Do you think, I mean, you're talking about a longevity of this platform, and of course sort of things that have cropped up with the Cold War II, Mark II in Ukraine, and the importance of unmanned aerial vehicles. Do you think there's a capacity within the platform to control swarms, not just one UAV, but number 20, 30, 50?
Yeah, in fact, one thing one of the ones I forgot to read out was the Germans are looking at using an uncrewed drone for electronic warfare to back up the Eurofighter EKs. It's definitely been looked at. Everybody's. I mean, one of the things I took out of the presentation, I worried about how long it was the desire to put a large aerial display into Typhoon. But obviously, that's partly so you can get that bigger picture with lots of, to control lots of drones all at the same time. Right, last question. I'm being harassed.
We bought F-35 because of the stealth. Because that's why we didn't buy more Eurofighters. Is that correct?
F-35 stealth is a big thing. It's obviously F-35 is arguably a flying computer. The mission systems are also again, it's a different paradigm. It's probably all can say on the matter. Typhoon does certain things very well. Obviously, the supersonic performance is one thing, and the fact that it's UK and we're not constrained by the Americans want to do things. So stealth's not everything, but yes, it was part of it was very different when we originally bought into F-35. Yeah.
It's funny that with the new aircraft that we're only going in with one other country, the Italians, aren't we?
So with Tempest, no, it's Japan as well.
Oh, sorry.
It's a three-way program.
Japan, isn't it? Yeah,
Japan,
sorry.
yeah. So, and
Thank
A
you.
parting word on that is just the difficulties the Germans have been working on the French on their new programme. There I'll leave it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a fascinating lecture, ladies and gentlemen. I was particularly interested in that S-curve. I've never seen that before. I probably should have.
Yeah, it's actually turned up in a few magazines.
Right. But very interesting the way that it kind of shows that you can quite. You first look at it and think, well, Raphael is a match for its opponent, but as you pointed out, you only have to make the opponent slightly more capable, and Raphael's dropped into the wrong part of the S-curve. Yeah, very interesting. And you're on that steep slope. The superiority of the Su-27 against the Western aircraft was well illustrated, I thought.
Yeah, when I was talking to tornado pilots in the late 80s, you could see him flinch every time I mentioned flanker. It really was a worry for them.
And I like that term. I've not heard the term nasal congestion before.
Yeah, I didn't invent it before, so I wish I had.
Yeah, it's an interesting term. Your illustration of why you'd be so detrimental to supersonic performance, having that great bulge on the nose and upsetting the aerodynamics was well done. So thank you. We have already done it, but I think it's worth asking the audience to show their appreciation in the